Sorry, folks, just figuring out all my screens this morning. Um, well, welcome everyone. No matter where you're dialing in from today, we're excited that you can join us for our first webinar in our Global Policy Webinar Series. The purpose of this webinar is to build a capacity for the AGU community to engage in global policy discussions. By the end of today's webinar, you will have a better understanding of COP and the role science and scientists can play in global climate discussions. It's essential that scientists, researchers, and students be a part of global climate discussions, so I'm excited that you're all joining us today. I know you're coming from different places and time zones, so I would love if everyone could share in the chat where you're located and how you're feeling today. How are you joining us today? Whether it's evening or morning for you. Use the technical difficulties. Give me 1 second.
Brittany, do you need a hand?
Oh, but you're muted, Brittany. Oh, okay.
Sorry, folks, I'm not sure what's happening with my slides, but 1 second. Something is up. Webster. My name is Brittany Webster, and I'm the manager of AGU Science Policy and Government Relations team. And as a department, we have two goals, I would say. The first is to enable AGU members to effectively engage policymakers and in the policymaking process. And the second is to ensure science and scientists are part of the policymaking process. And that's a big part of the reason why we're doing this PowerPoint or this webinar today. I want to provide just very bare bones background on COP, or the Conference of Parties. So it was established in 1994, and the aim of the framework is to prevent dangerous human interference with the climate system. And I think some of the hallmarks of the Conference of Parties has really been the Kyoto Protocol, and then of course the Paris Agreement. COP began as a small science diplomacy meeting with climate negotiations, but its purpose and attendance has really ballooned. I believe I heard it went from 50,000 to 100,000 last year in Dubai. So it's really become more than just a climate negotiations. And while those are still a very important part of the meeting, it's really become so much more. But I'm going to leave it to Janice to talk more about that and about AGU's role at the meeting. So today, I'm really excited about our lineup of speakers. We're going to hear from Janice LaChance, AGU's Interim Executive Director and CEO. We're going to hear from Youssef Hussein, the Director of Climate Innovation in the Office of the Special Envoy of Climate Change to the Office of the President of Kenya. And we're going to hear finally from Pam Pearson, who's the Director and Founder of the International Cryosphere Climate Initiative. And I just want to say, please feel free to add your questions to the Q&A box as we have our talks. We'll try to take 1 or 2 questions after each speaker and then have time at the end for questions as well. And we will share the recording of this webinar with all registered attendees. So before I hand it over to Janice, just to tell you a little bit more about our AGU's fearless leader, Janice LaChance. Janice has served as at AGU for 7 years, first as interim chief operating officer, and later as executive vice president of strategic leadership and global outreach. From 1997 to 2001, Janice served as director of the U.S. Office of Personnel Management under President Clinton. She's currently chair of the Federal Prevailing Rate Advisory Committee and a member of the Federal Salary Council. She has held leadership positions at the Special Libraries Association, the American Society for Public Administration, the Better Business Bureau Institute for Marketplace Trust, and the Society of Consumer Affairs Professionals. And with that, I will turn it over to Janice.
Thanks so much, Brittany, and thank you all for being here. We're really excited for this series of webinars and to have you all involved. We have a wonderful history at this point of participation at COPs. And let me just go back a little bit to talk about why we're doing this. And Brittany summed it up so well in her first slide that triggered a lot of thoughts in my mind while we were working on the technical issues for the webinar. The fact is that we want scientists at the table when policymakers are making decisions. We all know that no decision in the scientific arena, especially about climate, should occur without the input of our AGU members. And so when the board approved a strategic plan in right after our centennial in 2020, they made the decision that all of the great research and work that the scientific community does within AGU and in related scientific areas really should be used to try to solve some of society's biggest problems. And I think we'd all agree that climate certainly is up there. So that's when we started thinking about where can we get involved? What kind of impact can we have? How can we bring the terrific work of the AGU community to those who are making these really critical decisions that will affect everyone's future? So there's no doubt our members play a leading role when it comes to understanding climate change and delivering the resources to mitigate and adapt to any change. And the way to do it is getting all of you involved in the process. That global engagement is the key to this. And I'm so excited that AGU is spending some time and effort in webinars like this to get people up to speed, get them informed, and give them an avenue to participate. So I'm hoping that when we're done here, we can sign you up. When the first COP we went to, I have to say, was in Glasgow, and it was the one right after the pandemic. We had to get tested every day to make sure that we were negative and could attend. But at that point, we weren't accredited. We were just observing. And what's happened since is a realization of how crucial these global gatherings are. And so we went ahead and got official observer status for the UN COP meetings. And, you know, we are one of 3,500. So you might say, well, you know, what the heck difference does it make? But the reality is that when it comes to these issues, everyone gathers in one place on this planet every November or December, depending on the date, to discuss these important issues. And we believe that it's important to have you and your really important work there to participate and make sure that the work that you do is brought to the attention of those making these important decisions. Now, the observers, of which we are one, really come from all sectors of the economy. There's businesses, there's agriculture, there's research institutions, everyone, governments, obviously, you know, come from all around the world to do this. And it's interesting, once you're in sort of that UN system, you realize that this observer status, which gives you some privileges, isn't limited to COP. So we have been approved for observer status at other mission-aligned organizations like the UN Environmental Program. And we've achieved accreditation for special UN-associated events like the upcoming 2024 UN Ocean Decade Conference that will be held next month in Barcelona. So let me go back to COP, and I'm glad this slide's been up for a while, so hopefully you all have gotten a bit of a preview. When we go to these meetings, we have very specific goals. We want to establish relationships with governmental bodies among as many of the 198 parties that we can reach. We want to think about our ethical framework, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. But what we've decided to do is hone in on an area of expertise that AGU has very specifically. You all know we've been leaders in scientific ethics from the very beginning. You know, we were the first scientific society to declare sexual harassment the equivalent of scientific misconduct. So we wanted to take that expertise and apply it to climate. And so we have been shaping an ethical framework for climate intervention research. Again, more to come on that, but I didn't want to just throw that out there without a bit of an explanation. We want to play the long game too. We have an immediate goal in trying to educate people about the ethical framework, but we also want to identify potential partners who bridge science to actionable solutions. We want to engage and showcase AGU's community members who were at COP28. So we had this wonderful, and this is probably going to come up again, but this wonderful little social media campaign where we would just film our geoscientists, people who are interested in our issues, just say, why are you here? What have you accomplished? What are you hearing? What's important to you? And why was it important for you to be here? And then we want to raise awareness of our initiatives and our ability and capacity to inform science-based solutions and policy. So let me go back and talk a little bit about this framework. It really offers a construct and responsible guidelines for the research, experimentation, and potential deployment of climate intervention methods. Some people call it geoengineering. There's a lot of different names for it. And we don't know if it'll be needed, but unfortunately, as we all know, we're not really on track to meet the targets that were set in Paris several years ago. So people are looking at some of these measures in the ocean, in the stratosphere. How can we stop this climate change or slow it down if we, of our own volition as policymakers and consumers, can't make it happen on our own? So what we did, HEU is really just the convener here. Yes, we have expertise in ethics, and we sort of did a very, very rough draft. But what we did was bring in, I think we're about up to 50 now, a panel of global experts who understand climate science, who understand human rights, who understand policy and technological innovations to really shape the framework. We brought in ethicists, we brought in social scientists. And so what we're doing now is getting a written document that will be ready for presentation at COP29. But we've been talking about it now for a couple of COPs, so people understand, hopefully, its importance. We want to be sure that folks are consulted, that any of this geoengineering, that we don't really know the risks involved. We're not sure what the consequences might be. We want to be sure that every community that may be impacted has a voice in this, and that all of this research and potential deployment is done transparently. So the way we've approached it is really trying to focus on the COPs, and it's a year-long effort. We don't just, decide in the end of October to go somewhere to COP in November, but a lot of things happen there. So first of all, as you may have heard, COP28 included the establishment of a loss and damage fund alongside the consensus from nearly every country to transition away from fossil fuels, not phase down, but phase out. And that's a significant victory for those of you who understand or have a sense of the dynamic around the world of people who depend on fossil fuels and those who may not. But that's not really the whole picture. COP is really a place where people meet and have the opportunity to talk about climate and related sciences. So we're hoping to use that forum to advance our initiatives, our policy positions, and especially the work that you do. So in Dubai, we did go. I didn't get to go. I was slated to go, and then 36 hours before we were to leave, I was diagnosed with a detached retina. So that was the end of my travels to COP. But I went to COP26 and COP27. So what ended up happening at COP28 was that the delegation was a combination of staff and expert volunteers. And they really did a great job maximizing the opportunities that were presented at COP to emphasize the importance of science, to showcase critical themes like community science and open science, in addition to the ethical framework. And we sort of just have, for the last couple of COPs, 27 and 28, joined up with some of our member organizations and people that we work with on an ongoing basis, including WHOI, Scripps, the Bloomberg Foundation, and some 35 other global organizations to use the Ocean Pavilion as kind of our base of operations and a place to gather, host events, and have our meetings with other attendees. What we found was having a place where you could say, meet me at the Ocean Pavilion really makes a huge difference when you're dealing with 100,000 people. There's no place to sit. There's no place to get coffee. The food is all often has long, long lines. So having a pavilion that you can use as your home base has really been extraordinarily helpful. And I know you're going to hear from Pam, who is instrumental in the Cryosphere Pavilion, or even the US government. Most of the governments around the world have their own pavilions as well. So it's a combination of sort of issue-based pavilions and governments. So it's just nice to have a home when that's possible. One of the things we did at the Ocean Pavilion was host 4 events, and those get published, those get sent out on social media, and you get great attendance. So it's an opportunity to showcase what we're doing there, why we're there, who we are, and again, the importance of your work as Earth and space scientists. So there was this one, my favorite. Even though I couldn't go, I was getting up in the middle of the night to watch our panels and our events. Excuse me, I'm sorry. The cherry blossoms in DC are so beautiful, but they're wreaking havoc on my sinuses. So I'm sorry if I have to interrupt with some little coughing. But one that was really extraordinary that was moderated by Co Barrett, formerly of NOAA, was a really impactful session on women's leadership in ocean science. And it was just so incredibly rewarding to watch it. And every AGU-led event featured members of our community who were present and participating at COP on behalf of their own countries or their home institutions. So that was really vital to us to showcase AGU members and Earth and space scientists. So over the 2-week conference, our delegation, I was just so proud, even though I couldn't do any of these even remotely. AGU's delegation held more than 25 bilateral meetings with governments and intergovernmental bodies from around the world. And these one-on-one interactions really are where AGU advocates for policies that are relevant to you and also highlights your work. And it's our opportunity for us to work with other constituencies to collectively influence the negotiations of COP itself and what's happening behind those closed doors. So to inform and empower our members around the world, AGU's Science News Magazine, EOS, I hope all of you read that regularly, published a special edition on COP28 with translations in Spanish, French, Hindi, Arabic, and Chinese. Vital for us because we don't believe that the solutions to climate stop at the borders of any country, certainly not the United States. So we're trying to reach out very, very broadly. And finally, I have to say, the highlight for me was, even though I had to get up in the middle of the night to see them, it was no doubt was witnessing our remarkable members who were engaging at every level. They represented universities, organizations, they were part of the delegations from different countries. And we did spotlight, as I mentioned before, several members from different parts of the world under the hashtag AGU at COP on our social media channels. So if you haven't seen those, go back and take a look at them. They're just, people are so enthusiastic and so excited to be a part of something so big. So we firmly believe that science should and must have a voice on the world stage. And more than ever, we need science and scientists to be actively involved in the UNFCCC and COP process. We have a great staff. You've met Brittany, Mark is here, Mark Shimamoto, Lexi Schultz. There are probably others on here, but we're just a handful of people. What we really need is a small tribe who can really reach out to all of their contacts and have some of this impact. So it's imperative that we really find as many opportunities for connection and collaboration as possible, which is why AGU is present at COP. So looking ahead, COP29, we will continue to advocate for our ethical framework as well as other key priorities such as community science and AGU's Thriving Earth Exchange, which celebrated a decade of service last year and has launched more than 300 community science projects around the world. And much like the wider communities we see at COPs, these projects bring together scientists and community volunteers to tackle local challenges while we're thinking about some of the broader policy issues that are considered at COP. And while the projects are local, the message is global. When it comes to health and well-being of the species and the planet, everyone should be engaged with and benefit from science. We also highlight open science, which is a critical effort to increase capacity around the world, especially with nations that aren't as developed as others. We want the resources to be available to everybody so that we can get the best thinking of everyone around the world. So just a little note, if you haven't kept up. Over the last decade, AGU has shifted many of our journals to open access. 12 of our 24 journals, specifically, are open access with more to come. And more than half of all articles in all of the AGU journals are open access upon publication, no waiting period. So what we're hoping is that you're going to get involved. So I'm glad these QR codes are up. I want to see everyone getting their phones up and pointing them at the screens and really thinking about what you can do to pitch in with us, lock arms with us, and see what kind of impact we can have. Thanks, Brittany.
Thanks so much, Janice. Really appreciate those remarks. We're running a little behind, everyone, so we're going to go to our next speaker because he is actually at another event and has to leave us shortly. So I'm really happy today that we could be joined by Yusuf Hussain, who is the Climate Finance Advisor to the Office of the Special Envoy for Climate Change under the Executive of the President of Kenya. Prior to this, he worked at the Kenya energy and banking sector, as well as energy and planning advisory roles in several other African countries. Yusuf holds a bachelor's degree as well as a master's degree in finance, and he is a member of the Certified Public Accountants of Kenya, as well as being a certified financial analyst. And with that, I will turn it over to him.
Thank you, Brittany, and thank you, everyone. I'm caught in between running sessions here at the Berlin Energy Dialogue and attending this important webinar. As she said, my name is Yusuf Hussain, Climate Finance Advisor from the Office of the Special Envoy for Climate Change under the Executive Office of the President of Kenya, mainly supporting on crowding finances to de-risk projects in Africa and accelerate investment in its potential to affect the challenges of Africa growing and industrializing to increase emission, but rather grow and industrialize through going green and probably have negative contributions to the emissions. My president, who also happens to be the chair of Heads of States and Government for the Climate Change African Union, and also that was up as the chair of African Union Institutional Reforms, which was given recently from the 37th session of the African Union, February this year. Kenya has also won the African Group of Negotiators a 2-year term, the chair for a 2-year term starting 1st of April. And in this spirit, in the spirit of all this, I think it's important to create a stronger link between the scientific community and the decision makers in major world events, especially in the COP negotiations to enhance the integration of scientific research into policy-making processes. And this can be achieved through a well-thought channels of communication, collaborations, and knowledge sharing. The United Nations climate change process, through its convention bodies, usually relies on scientific information on climate change submitted by many contributors. And as also as the speaker before me was alluding to, that has been the norm. But through organizations such as Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and the World Meteorological Organizations, amongst others, have always been requested by parties to engage with the subsidiary bodies for science and technological advice to intermittently update it and the conference of parties on their work. And that said, I think science can play a crucial role in improving the COP process and negotiation process. And here are some of the few facts maybe I should put on the table why we should utilize science. Science and research can provide valuable data and information on various climate-related issues such as causes and impact of climate change, greenhouse gas emission, renewable energy technologies, and adaptation strategies. These scientific findings can help negotiators and the whole and make the whole process a well-informed process with informed decisions during the negotiation, informed outcomes during the negotiations. It can also help in analyzing the effectiveness of proposed climate targets and policies using models and simulations to estimate the potential impact on reducing greenhouse gas emission. This analysis can help negotiators also evaluate the feasibility and potential outcome of the different approaches, where I think also science can play an important role with scientific research in identifying gaps in knowledge, as well as emerging issues and challenges related to climate change, which can guide negotiators in addressing new concerns and improving the effectiveness of the future agreements. Science can also provide common language and framework for discussing complex technical issues by translating scientific findings into accessible language. Scientists can help ensure that negotiators from different backgrounds can understand and engage in discussion on topics like carbon pricing, technological innovations, and mitigation strategies to combat these climate change effects. Science and scientific methods such as monitoring, reporting, and verification, MRV, can also be employed to ensure transparency and accountability of the country's climate actions. These methods can help track progress and measure emissions and assess the effectiveness of the policies in place, providing a solid foundation for negotiation discussions. Overall, I think leveraging on science and bringing science into the COP negotiation can help design a more informed, inclusive, and effective framework for addressing climate change at global level. Thank you, Brittany and team.
Thank you so much, Yusuf. So we do have a moment if anyone has a question for in the chat, or if you want to use the Q&A function. We have a couple minutes to ask a question if anyone has one. Hearing none, I'll say thank you so much, Yusuf, for your time and for joining us at another conference. We really appreciate it. And thank you. And with that, I'm going to turn to our third.
Thank you, Brittany. I will listen in and then see if there's anywhere I'll be required to say something. And I can see Janice nodding. Thank you, Janice.
Thank you, Yusuf. Going to turn to our next speaker, Pam Pearson. Pam is a former U.S. diplomat with 20 years of experience working on global issues, including climate change and non-proliferation. She served in postings to Ecuador, Sweden, Norway, and on detail to U.S. aid, worked in Central Asia to design some of the first environmental health programs there. She was a part of the Kyoto Protocol climate negotiation team and later served as the U.S. focal point to the Global Fund on AIDS. Pam founded the International Cryosphere Climate Initiative in 2010 to bring greater attention and policy focus to the rapid changes happening in the cryosphere environment. And with that, I will turn it over to Pam.
Thank you so much. Just confirming you can see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, super. So I'm going to gallop through this actually, so there's plenty of time for discussion and questions afterwards. Some of these slides I'll barely talk over, but they're available for those of you who I would call nerdy diplomatic types to talk about this. So one of the things that you know, a lot of this is going to be focused on cryosphere, but to the extent possible, I'm trying to bring in all science because, of course, all kinds of science. And it was really good that Yusuf, you know, raised things such as modeling and being able to show that NDCs are having the impact that they're supposed to have. It's really a broad area, but of course, we focus on polar and mountain regions. And so a lot of what I'm going to talk about is going to focus on that. And cryosphere, especially in the UNFCCC context, has really moved from being the canary in the coal mine to driving a lot of what we see going on in the climate space, as a system, but also in terms of motivating urgency, because most of these dynamics cannot be walked back even if temperature goes down. And so it's really set by the set point, the highest point of temperature that we come to in many cases, which is why it's so important not to overshoot or minimize overshoot to the greatest extent possible, because for each 1/10 of a degree, we're going to see more and more global impacts because of melting or lost cryosphere. So there are a lot of science to policy forums, and Janice mentioned, not just UNFCCC, but UNEP and others. These are some of our key meetings. So it also includes, say, the Arctic Council, the Antarctic Treaty System. There are a lot of different mountain partnerships or agreements. But in terms of climate, really the UNFCCC is the main one, and often these others will send you back to the UNFCCC, especially say in the Antarctic Treaty System. If one raises things like sea level rise there, it can be very hard to even be allowed to talk about it at those meetings. And again, from our point of view, the key cryosphere dynamics, because these have global impact, are permafrost in terms of the emissions, sea level rise from loss of polar ice sheets, loss of water resources from mountain glaciers and snow, sea ice, which has all sorts of global feedbacks. And by the way, we used to talk primarily about Arctic sea ice, but now Antarctic sea ice has essentially caught up and has lost about the same percentage. And then, of course, polar ocean acidification, warming, and freshening, which is really directly related to the amount of CO2 that we have in the atmosphere. And science-relevant UNFCCC negotiating tracks, in some ways, of course, all of them are, but there are serious implications in terms of these right here. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the periodic review, which is under the Framework Convention, which is the first climate agreement, really. Paris is under the Framework Convention, and the big focus in Dubai was the first global stock take, literally taking stock of where we are to help guide the next round of climate commitments called Nationally Determined Contributions, NDCs, as Yusuf referred to. But then there are others like, adaptation, loss and damage, and a newer one is the Mitigation Work Program. So it's important to understand where you've been in terms of where we're going to be going for COP29 and COP30. From, again, the cryosphere point of view, we managed to get the word into the preamble in Glasgow. But the most important part of the Glasgow Pact, as the cover decision is called, is that it really emphasized 1.5 over 2 degrees C. And that was a major accomplishment in Glasgow. And, if you come back to this presentation, look at the difference, actually read the difference between Paris Article 2 and the Glasgow Restatement of Paris, which again focuses on 1.5. This has become really important in the subsequent COPs. And so it became a point of debate again in Egypt at COP27. We almost lost the line on that. In other words, more of an emphasis on 2 degrees, more so than 1.5. So walking back the Glasgow language, a lot of pushback on that from both the scientific community and others such as the European Union and eventually the United States. From the cryosphere point of view, we were really trying to get more text in, and it talked for the first time about science and urgency and operational language. In other words, not just in a preamble. And in legal terms, as a diplomat, I can tell you the preamble, it might get you a cup of coffee, but it really doesn't mean anything. It's flowery language before what comes after that, which is what the parties signing that are essentially committing to. So it was important to get it into the operational language, the language below the preamble. And that's set up for some really good scientific inputs. We actually held a pre-sessional meeting, a full day just focused on the latest cryosphere science and how that would impact especially the global stock take. So what happened to COP28? And again, this is from our point of view. But I have to say that in many ways, it was still a step back. We did hold the line on 1.5, but with a great deal of difficulty if you compare the first text that came out with the text after that. It did include, and you had a lot of attention to this language of transition away from fossil fuels, but that came from our point of view at a high cost. Again, thinking about, we really need to be reducing fossil fuels according to the IPCC emissions pathways that are more consistent with 1.5. But transitional fuels were mentioned. That is actually a reference to natural gas or fossil gas, as it's coming to be called instead, which has, even in a best case scenario, actually about 70% of the emissions of coal. In the best case, and in the worst case, it's about the same as coal. We still talk about phasing down, not phasing out coal, and it's unabated coal. And there's a reference to carbon capture, utilization, and storage, which again is a way to exploit fossil fuels without the actual exploitation causing the emissions that are kind of on the side of that exploitation, but still allows you to use and burn the fossil fuels, which is the greater difficulty. We saw, and we had a large scientific presence there from the cryosphere and polar science community, much more greater uptake of this message of urgency, but we lost actually any operational cryosphere specific language. There were several references, if you know the code, in the loss and damage section, slow onset events and low likelihood, high impact events. That refers actually to Antarctic-based sea level rise, but you have to know the code to even know that. There was a proposal for a mountains and climate change dialogue that was taken up, so that will be taking place in June. But there was a real opaque process, I would say, and a sidelining of civil society. For those of you who were there, the ocean and the cryosphere pavilions were both in the nature pavilion, which was literally as far away as you could get from the action. In other words, where the negotiations were taking place. And that was noted. There were pledges to the Loss and Damage Fund for the first time, and that was important, but it actually somewhat sidelined a push for really 1.5 consistent mitigation. And of course, we saw signs of cryosphere stress, and year-on-year CO2 levels continue to grow. So what's coming? And I think this is what we can talk about later if there are questions. COP29, which is going to be in Baku in Azerbaijan, and COP30, which will be in Belém, Brazil. Really, they, together with the Dubai COP, the UAE, have come together to form a troika, and they have reiterated their commitment to 1.5 degrees C, at least in a statement. We really don't know what that's going to mean. In SB 60, which is the intersessional meetings that take place every June, usually May, June in Bonn, Germany, there will be a Mountains and Climate Change Technical Dialogue, and of course the annual Oceans Dialogue, which is now a mandated annual event, as well as research dialogues. That is usually 3 hours, usually one morning during this. That's another place where the scientific community can give input, and observers are actually requested to put in for different kinds of focuses in the research dialogues. And so AGU, for example, could do that. ICCI usually does as well. At COP29, looking at Baku, one thing that we may be emphasizing is that the capital is entirely reliant actually on mountain water resources. It will be the beginning discussions of NDCs. There may be challenges to effective science policy participation. There's talk of a turquoise zone, which would neither be a green or a blue zone, where pavilions like the Oceans Pavilion, where AGU has traditionally taken part. We hope we'll take part in the Cryosphere Pavilion as well, as a sponsor if possible. But in any case, if it's separate, entirely separate from the negotiations, there'd be a big question for us as to whether or not it's really effective anymore in interacting with the negotiators. And there will be a decision on the third periodic review. In other words, are we going to look at the adequacy of the current Paris goal of a limit of 2 degrees with efforts to pursue 1.5 degrees, there's already talk of, yes, let's do a third periodic review and let's sharpen it. Let's really focus on 1.5 alone. That will be an issue of debate in Baku, and then probably more follow on in COP30. So in Brazil, of course, there's the threat to the Amazonas crossing a threshold, which is going to be really important. There will be finalization then of the 2025 NDCs. People get confused about this. The 2025 NDCs are commitments for the next period, which is actually 2030-35. So you can see we're really already behind this 2030 goal. So this is sort of where we need to be, is the 1.5 limit. We are not there. We really need very sharp 1.5 consistent emissions. I did this slide this morning. We have actually already exceeded 426 on a daily basis this year. The peak last year was 424, but when I took a look later today, we actually on March 15th had 427.93, so almost 428. And I have never seen that much of a rise. I actually had a chance to talk to someone that might be caused by El Nino, but even in past El Ninos, we haven't seen this much of a difference. So 2025 NDCs really need to bring some course correction. So in talking science to policymakers, be aware that policymakers have a lot of things on their plate. Be realistic about what they're facing. There was already a bit of a talk about geoengineering. I will just say that there are growing and well-funded presence that most people in the cryosphere science community really are alarmed at the degree to which things like, say, marine curtains are gaining uncritical coverage in the media. And there's a lot of criticism of that, actually. And so we're hoping to get some more balanced coverage of that. And take advantage of any opportunity to communicate, but always watch out to stress uncertainty. If you have to talk about it in the middle. Don't lead, don't end with it, because a policymaker will say, if that's the case, why do I need to listen to you? So these are some of the ways that we have gone ahead and engaged. There was over 1,000 scientists who joined a call for 1.5 alone. We put out the State of the Cryosphere every year. And of course, we have the Cryosphere Pavilion. This is not our best pavilion, but it was the best we could do with the kind of split presence that was this past year. And I have a few more slides on here, but I am over time. So I'm going to stop here and return so that there's more time for discussion and questions.
Thank you so much, Pam. Wonderful seeing that, and that, the work you're doing to elevate the voice, I'll say. So not seeing any questions yet in the chat, but one question, or in the Q&A function, I should say, one question for all the panelists is, whose voice or what voices would you like to see elevated at the next COP? Yusuf, I know your time is limited, so I'd like to start with you, if that's okay. Maybe he's in a crowded space. I'll turn to Janice first and then Pam for that question. Janice, you're on mute.
Somebody has to do that at every meeting. It's a requirement. We would love to see more scientists who are in the midst of all this research. We know there's wonderful work being done, both on the research side and on the policy side. How can we get those working scientists to COP to help with this? AGU sends out surveys and emails saying, will you be there? Will you attend? Can you join your nation's official delegation? How can, do you have other sources of badges and passes that you could use to go? And we have seen increasing numbers. And we want to keep that up. And, the more people know that AGU is there, the more we hope they'll be in touch with us to let us know that they're participating and that we can connect with them. We can use them on panels. We can use them as part of our education effort while we're at COP, and just support them in any way that we can.
Yeah, and I would say, we very deliberately this time, for the first time, made sure that we had at least one scientist from a senior scientist. We always have early career scientists. If any of you are early career scientists, I'd encourage you to apply to that program of volunteers that we have each COP at the Cryosphere Pavilion. But to have at least one senior scientist from each of those 5 dynamics present at all times, so they could interact with negotiators, answer media questions with other civil society, that was really effective. What I'd like to see more of at the next COP are those voices combined with the impacted vulnerable peoples. We did some of that with the lead negotiator from Bangladesh, for example, who really got this, that, his country is dependent on a healthy cryosphere, and he was willing to say that. And I think intertwining those 2 kinds of voices would be really, really important at this COP as we start looking at the next commitment period. And I did see a question in the chat about why it was de-emphasized. Honestly, I think that part of what happened was that the debate over how or if fossil fuels would be referred to was so sharp that there was almost not room for anything else. But we've been very self-critical too, because there were no parties. And at the end of the day, it's parties, right? It's governments that were willing to even slightly rock the boat to make sure that it was emphasized. And that's what we need to see more of. We're talking to government saying, make this one of your top 2 or 3 talking points, because if it isn't there, and probably the funniest one, although it wasn't funny, was Switzerland, which has had traditionally as one of its top talking points the oceans and the oceans dialogue. And yet here's a country that lost 10% of its glaciers over the past 2 years. I think they're probably going to bump cryosphere up in future, because we weren't the only ones who noticed.
Yeah, so Pam, you mentioned I believe it was a scholarship or fellowship you mentioned to bring more scientists to COP. There's kind of 2 comments in the chat about, the cost of attending COP, right? So one thing in particular, though, especially because I often find our science policy audience tends to skew younger, would love to know, are there specific recommendations or places maybe for graduate students or early career folks to look for opportunities and resources to help support them in attending COP?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of ways. Obviously, if you're not a cryosphere scientist, you can't serve as a volunteer at our pavilion. But I would say find out first if your institution is an observer organization, because it might be, and you can get a badge through that. Every year we get lots of, I don't know how you do this, but you guys are smart, and so you can probably figure it out. We just get emails that clearly have gone to every single observer organization at the COP asking, do you have a spare badge? It only takes one organization saying less to that. And in terms of, aside from costs of travel, which is, hard in terms of flights, and there's carbon footprints, et cetera, that everybody is worried about these days. Especially young people can usually find a cheaper place to stay. You don't have to stay at a hotel. Look for Airbnbs, go on booking.com, but be careful, because there are always scams out there. But we always stay very cheaply. We actually have managed to stay under $100 a night at every single COP, but we share. We share apartments. Just go on the economy. And here again, a lot of the scientists we work with are field scientists, so it's a lot more comfortable than a snow cave. They're fine.
Thanks so much, Pam. We are fastly running out of time, so apologies that we were not able to get to everyone's question. But just want to share a couple of upcoming opportunities from the science policy community here. There we go. So AGU every year updates our position statements, and these position statements are really the bedrock of our science policy work here at AGU. And they enable AGU to provide scientific expertise on significant policy issues related to science. And we currently have 3 statements up for member comment. They opened up last Friday, and you will be able to comment on these until the end of April. So there's one related to the climate crisis, one related to science communication, and one related to data. Please scan the QR code if you're interested in commenting or just reading the statements. I'd encourage you to take a look at the statements to get a better understanding of AGU's what AGU stands for. And also too, there's a wonderful From the Prowl post that kind of talks you through more about the position statement and the position statement process. And also very exciting, some of you might have heard of our Voices for Science program. If you're located in the EU, UK, or Canada, I encourage you to consider applying to our International Voices for Science cohort. AGU's Voices for Science program supports, rewards, and fosters a network of exceptional science communication and science policy advocates to amplify the voice of science and build valuable dialogues and relationships with key audiences. If you're interested in applying to this international cohort, please scan the QR code for more information. We're currently accepting applications through the end of March. And finally, if you are going to be at EGU next month, please consider attending this session. It's organized by several members of the current EU UK Voices for Science cohort, and one of the members of the cohort, Sebastian, will also be presenting as well. Additionally, please stop by the AGU booth. We'd love to connect with you. Actually, there's one more thing. So this is just the start of our webinar series. We're planning 3 more for the year. Our next one will be on May, and we'll focus on how to write a policy brief. And with that, I just want to say thank you. And as a reminder, we will send out slides as well as all of these opportunities for those of you interested in learning more. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thanks, Brittany.
Bye, everyone.